Hello again, folks. I hope all of you are doing well. In this lecture, I'm going to talk to you about developing a good conclusion, or as I like to think of it, finishing your essay with a bang. Now, conclusions is another one of those writing topics for which I don't think it's actually very helpful to show you, a lot of examples and expect you to memorize, what the features of a good or bad conclusion resemble. Rather, I'm gonna just give you some pointers on, first of all, things to avoid, and then also look at some good factors in a conclusion, and then kind of wrap it up. And ultimately, it's up to you to take this information, apply it to your own writing where you think it's appropriate, and then after you've kind of tested these methods out, if it's not working and you need additional help, feel free to let me know. That's what I'm here for. So first off, things to avoid in your conclusion. Probably the number one thing that I want all of you to remember to avoid in a conclusion is only summarizing the main points of your paper. Now, please don't misunderstand where I'm coming from here, folks. The summary can indeed be a part of your paper, but it should not be the entirety of your paper. Even when you're working on an informative essay, which is in and of itself mainly a summary, you generally want to go a step beyond that in the conclusion and build some significance to your paper, and we'll talk about that shortly. Another thing you want to avoid in your conclusions, and I've seen a lot of this lately, which is why I wanted to produce this lecture, is you don't want to simply paraphrase or reword your thesis statement. That can be part of it, but I would consider, if you're just rewording, your thesis, that I would consider to be an act of summarizing something that you already said, which, in part can be okay, but you want to go beyond that. Another thing that you want to avoid is introducing a new idea that has little or nothing to do with what you've said up above in the paper. You can occasionally build new nuggets, maybe a new call to action or warning into the conclusion, but you want to make sure that if you introduce a new item in the conclusion, that it is clearly connected to what you've said earlier in that paper. You also want to avoid tacking a sentence or two onto your final point. To think about this another way, you don't want to just put the conclusion right at the end of what you would otherwise consider a body paragraph. The conclusion should always be a paragraph or paragraphs unto itself. For the type of essays that you're writing in this class, one paragraph would probably be all that you would need. But whenever you need to write, a more extended research style essay, it is completely, appropriate for that length of paper to have a conclusion that could be multiple paragraphs. And I don't even really want to put a cap on that, because I think it's kind of silly and narrow-minded in a way to think of a conclusion in that way. But to kind of go back to my original point here, you don't want to just kind of tack a sentence or two onto a body paragraph and kind of wipe your hands clean and be like, well, I'm done here. That kind of conclusion just really strikes your audience, and uh, being a big part of your audience, me, your professor, as an act of sheer laziness. So, always make it at least a paragraph unto itself. Another thing that I see a lot of young students do in the conclusion, especially if it was a topic that was challenging for you, there's a temptation at the end of your paper to overtly diminish your own authority on that topic. And let's say, for instance, even though reading about this topic drives me nuts a little bit, a lot of times when people write on a scientific topic, an environmental topic perhaps, like fracking or global warming, at the end of the essay they'll make a statement to the fact that, something to the effect of, well, to the best of my knowledge, this is why I'm opposed to fracking, for example, but I'm no expert. Even though I understand where people are coming from when they make those kind of statements, it's kind of understood when you're in this course, that you're not going to be a professional geologist, let's say, that could really speak with your own sort of personal and professional authority on something like fracking. I understand where you folks are at. You know where you're at in terms of your development. So it's not really necessary to come right out and overtly say, well, I've done my best, but, that's understood. Don't diminish yourself. Write with confidence. Write with purpose. And then along that same line, you don't want to artificially attempt to cover up a weak paper. Where I would see this come into play quite a bit is in English 1060, the next course up from this, or other college writing courses that place a higher premium, if you will, on research that goes into an essay, and students more frequently than I'd like it at the end of that kind of paper will make a statement to the effect of, well, I've done the best I could, but I didn't have much time. Or the other one that I hear in addition to I didn't have much time is there just weren't any good sources on this topic. I'm gonna put this as nicely as I can, folks, but bull honky, and I don't think anyone actually says that anymore. It's just my polite way of cussing without actually cussing. But between the internet and the university library system, which you're going to learn about in this class, there's no excuse for not finding good sources on whatever topic you want to write about. And believe me, I've had, in the years that I've been a teacher, I think I've read paper topics on just about anything you can imagine, from papers that analyze movies and other kind of pop culture items to papers that, you know, debated how to treat cancer. So the sources are there. You know, it's up to you to go out and look, and if you need help, you know, ask your professor, ask a librarian. I don't want to go down that road too much, because again, we'll talk about that later on, but know that there is a lot of good information out there, and you don't have an excuse like that to artificially try to cover up an incomplete or unfinished essay. Okay, summary of good features. First, a summary can be a good and positive aspect of your paper. You just don't want to let it overwhelm the whole conclusion. It can be maybe a sentence or two generally, but then you want to move on. You want to go beyond that. You want to build significance into your paper, or as I like to think of it, be a salesperson of knowledge, or salesperson for knowledge if you prefer. But anyway, just playing with the preposition there. So, last slide. Here are a couple ideas on how to build significance into your conclusion. You can close the essay with a provocative quote. Only remember that if you do something like that, kind of same principle for when you start your essay with a quote. You want to make sure that the quote is clearly tied to what you've talked about in the essay. So don't just throw out a quote for sheer shock value. Make sure that there's a clear connection between that quote and what you've been writing about in your paper. Otherwise, it's pretty much a waste of time, both for you, the writer, and for your audience, the readers. You can close an essay with a vivid image or idea. An example of this would be some time ago I read a newspaper column which opposed the practice of partial birth abortion, and the writer of the column closed it by saying that, basically describing the process of what happens to the fetus, a baby, whichever term you want to prefer, in the act of partial birth abortion. And then they said, if you can imagine what that feels like happening to you, then you can't possibly support the practice of partial birth abortion. Now, regardless of where you stand or sit on the issue of abortion, just the image and the idea, the feeling that was evoked in that conclusion, is something that has stuck with me a lot of years. And this was, I think I read that column back in 1997, and that's been darn near 20 years, longer than some of you, I imagine, have been alive, which, by the way, makes me feel a little old, because that was the year that I graduated from high school. But that's my problem, not yours. I am indeed getting old, but such is life. Happens to all of us sooner or later. Anyway, moving on. You can close your paper with a call for some sort of action. Environmental papers, this is frequently a way that those kind of papers are closed. The fracking papers are a good example. You can close and say based on the evidence that I presented you on fracking and the damage that it can do, um, this is what we need to do to stop that practice. So it's a very, very assertive, very, if you will, forthright. I don't know if I want to use progressive because that's could be misused, but it's a very upfront, take charge way of ending a paper. Kind of the opposite of that, but um, can be equally effective, is to end a paper with a warning. And, you know, global warming papers, you see this a lot, or papers related to cancer. Uh, I'll use that example for a moment since I spent a lot of time, I don't know why, but I've done it. I've spent a lot of time talking about environmental uh, issues and topics in this paper, which is ironic because after all the years that I've taught these courses, I'm a little tired of reading papers on those subjects. Don't get me wrong, y'all can still write them and I'll still grade them fairly. I just don't particularly enjoy reading those papers. Not my cup of tea, but anyway, another way that you can end that sort of paper instead of a call to action would be end it with a warning and to effectively say, okay, this is the evidence that I presented you with, and if we don't do this, and this, X, Y, and Z, this is what will happen. So you're not exactly telling them what they must do, right? As you would have been a moment ago with the call to action technique. With a warning, you're saying, if we don't do this, if we don't clean up our water, you're gonna get sick. If you don't quit smoking cigarettes, probably gonna get cancer. So it's sort of an if-then thing. If we don't do this, X, Y will happen. That's sort of the formula, if you will, for that kind of ending. You can indeed state new knowledge about that you want to spotlight, that you hope your reader will have gained by reading your paper. That is indeed fine. But as I alluded to a little bit ago, if you use that technique, you want to make sure that the new knowledge that you state is clearly connected to what you've been talking about in your paper. And then finally, and then I'll shut up and each of you can go on their merry way and quit listening to my voice. The final way that I think you can build that significance is to try to do what we call universalize your argument. So if you've got a topic that primarily just applied to you or your local community, you can try to broaden it out, try to say this is what's happening here, but it could be happening in other places. It could indeed be happening around the world, or you could say something like, I've seen people write papers on animal rights topics and say, the people in my area who, care about animals and the humane society shelters have been able to make a difference in this community, wherever it might have been, and then they'll kind of close it by saying, if you make that same effort, broadening out to people out there, if you will, outside of their immediate community, immediate network. You can make that much of a difference as well, if not an even greater difference than what we've done here. So there are some similarities, to be sure, to a call to action, but I think any of these techniques can be useful, can be helpful, but again, it's up to you to kind of, try to apply these where and when you think it's appropriate. And like I said, if you really don't think that, if you think that you tried these and they're not really helping you out, let me know. I'll be glad to work with you on a more one-on-one level to address the issue and hopefully help you move forward a step or two as a writer. And having said that, until next time, folks, take care, be well, be safe, and whatnot. Feel free to ignore this kind of a dumb part here, but anyway, take care, folks. Bye.